told your friend you're not okay? And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away, as you fade away.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, cause every time I wake
Hey YouTube, how's it going today? Today I'm out actually shooting panoramas of all things. Something I do all the time, and this video is about panoramas, but it's about panoramas in Microstock. So there's a ton of pano videos out there, instructional. This isn't really one of them. This is just a sort of a three-part video. The first part is going to be about my earnings on Microstock with panoramas. It's going to be real quick. The second part is just a quick overview on how I shoot them, because I do change the way I shoot them when I'm shooting for stock. And then the third thing in this video is really going to be about processing. So my preferred technique using Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. So if those three segments interest you, stick around for all of them. If the first is all you're here for, that's great. Stick around as long as you want. I want to make my video so you can leave once you get your the part that's interesting to you. So I'm going to fire away right now. The first thing I want to do is show you a clip of image earnings on my Adobe stock account, and it's going to show the number of images that are actually panos versus just single frame photos. So let's jump into that right now. I'm going to show you, this is just basically sales in order, in date order, so no other refinement of search options. And I'm just going to show you something here. This is a panorama right here. Panorama, actually same shot. Panorama, 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 pano, 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 pano. Yeah, just that's how many panoramas are listed as having sold in a period of time that I have not selected, other than the fact these are my most recent sale. You can see that big chunk of my earnings on Adobe stock are related to pano images, panoramic images. Okay, so I hope that's interesting. I got the sun just coming right up into my eyes right now, so I guess I didn't set this up too much or too well. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is how to shoot them for Microstock. And so I'm going to go over the basics first. Now, we're shooting panoramas. The most important thing is that you're shooting in manual. So it's good to know how to work the manual mode on your DSLR, your mirrorless, or whatever you're using. Manual is key because you want to make sure that each frame is exactly the same, has the same exposure, has the same focus, has the same white balance, all that jazz. So manual is important. So basically what you want to do is take a frame, or sort of meter your subject, maybe in the middle of the proposed panoramic subject, and then you use that as your point for setting your exposure. So you want to have a little bit of a good aperture, so not too shallow of a depth of field, depending on what you're focusing on. So then you set your shutter speed and your aperture off that. Then you focus, and then you switch into manual focus, and you want to have your white balance set on manual too. So if it's daylight, you put it in daylight. You can change it later, but you want to just make sure that you have all your Kelvins consistent across the image. Now you have a choice between shooting it in landscape or portrait mode. Portrait mode gives you much more pixel to work with, and it gives you a broader image, so you have more room to crop or to fix mistakes. It's a little slower because when you take panoramas, what you want to do is you want to overlap each shot by a third. So you take a shot, then you switch,
but keep it overlapping by a third, then you move, and you keep it overlapping by a third. So if you're shooting in portrait, often you have to shoot 7, 8, 9, 10 images, whereas in landscape you only have to shoot 3. So that's my preferred approach, is to hit it with 3 landscape style photos. That's usually broad enough to cover the whole vista, sometimes 4 overlapping by a third again. The other thing about shooting in landscape is you're shooting fewer images, so you're tying up fewer resources, but also importantly is you have less of a opportunity to make a mistake. Yeah, so sometimes if you're not perfectly still, or you wreck one image because you are shooting handheld, it can wreck the whole panorama. So it's good just to check in with yourself, make sure you're all in manual, you're set up properly, you've got that focus point set, you know how to you've metered the scene, and you know the manual exposure and the settings that you want, and then you very deliberately shoot through and shoot each image. You pop, shoot, then you move, you freeze, shoot, move, freeze, shoot, just so you make sure you don't get any blur in your image by shooting while you're still in the pivot. Okay, so all of this also applies to using a tripod. I do use a tripod when it's low light because I want to make sure that my ISO is at 100 all the way through the shot, so I get the cleanest and the least noise in my image. Basically, you can use this technique anywhere. I shoot panoramas of pretty much everything. I shoot them everywhere. I shoot them in landscapes. I shoot the cityscapes. I shoot inside cities and narrow areas. I've shot I've shot panos everywhere. Okay, the last thing I want to say about shooting panoramas is you actually can get pretty consistent and pretty good at it, shooting level all the way across the image, and that helps in post-processing, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But if you don't have the images lined up on a plane and even all the way across, you can have chunks of the image that are missing when you stitch them together. That can sometimes, usually be corrected in post, but it's just easier if you get a nice flat level image and all your verticals are lined up really nicely, especially for cityscape. You like to have everything really nice and straight. It just helps speed up the process. And certainly for Microstock, you don't want to have to work too hard at it. You want your images to line up really nicely. The other thing I wanted to say about the Microstock part of it is I shoot handheld more than tripod because I like to move fast. So when I'm out on a stock photography sort of mission, I want to get as much as I can get. And setting up a tripod and really slowly taking a 12-shot pano with all in portrait orientation, that's a really slow process, and so you get fewer shots. And Microstock is a numbers game, so if I can shoot 30 panos in multiple spots within a kilometer radius, that's what I'm trying to do. And so get good at doing handheld, because I think that's the key to shooting on Microstock. If you're fast at handheld, you're steady, and you're keep your focus and do everything right, you can get a lot of good shots very quickly without a tripod. So I'm gonna try to shoot, my plan now is to shoot the skyline here behind me. Same process that I described. I'm gonna go 3 or 4 images, then I'm gonna shift, I'm gonna move down the sidewalk, just shooting as I go. I'm gonna cross the bridge over onto the other bank of the river, and I'm gonna just keep moving along the top of the river, and I'm gonna shoot some panoramas. But what I want to do now is I actually want to jump into post, and I'm going to pick one of them to process, and I'm going to do that now. So join me in post-processing if you're interested in how I process panoramic images.
Okay, so the panorama that I wanted to put together for you this morning, I have 3 images, and I'm going to combine these together in Lightroom. So I'm going to select all of them, Control-click, photo merge, panorama. And Lightroom's just going to quickly create the panorama here. And yeah, I just often will select between spherical and cylindrical to see which one looks the best. I find that the only real difference is when you put it in cylindrical, it appears to be, the image appears to be a little bit taller. So I often like that. So I'm just going to go with cylindrical here right now, and I don't typically use the boundary warp or the fill. I find that the boundary warp can add some weirdness. Sometimes it works. And then as far as the fill, the autofill, I find it works much better in Photoshop. So that's what I'm doing currently. So I'm just going to hit merge. Okay, so here we have the image now all put together. It looks pretty good. Everything looks okay. So typically the first thing that I do with really not just panels, but any sort of architecture or image with buildings in it, is the first thing I do is I go to the transform box on Lightroom, and I just want to make sure that I can get my angles the way that I want them, or my verticals on the buildings. I find it's really important to have buildings that are vertically straight. I think that's something that does set apart contributors to a certain extent, the ones that are willing to make sure that their images have been checked to ensure that the lines are vertical. So I'm just going to place that there like that. Now you can see the buildings are generally pretty straight across the image, so I like that. That's exactly what I want it to look like. So I'm done with that. Then I'm comfortable with that. I generally have a bit of a formula on noise reduction, so I do like to reduce the noise. Typically about 25% with my camera sensor, since it's pretty noise free. Then I'll mask that. That looks pretty good. So now it's a sharp image. Get rid of that. I'll just get rid of that now that that stuff's done. So coming up to the actual image, the interesting point I can see right away is kind of how Photoshop's going to put together these or deal with these bars when I process image. So that might affect my decisions on how to crop this image. But I'm going to crop it after I process it. So first thing I do in Lightroom is my white balance. I typically find that my camera shoots a little bit blue or a little pale, so I tend to push up the temperature a little bit. I think this was morning, so it was actually fairly warm outside, but that's where I'm gonna at least start it. Then when I always bring down the highlights and right -100 there. Shadows I open up. I don't typically go all the way. I find it looks really sort of, I don't even know if that's HDR-y. So I don't typically open them up all the way, but I will for a certain amount. You can, if you do open your shadows all the way up, you can always drop the clarity a bit or the texture. That helps take away that HDR feel from it. So I'm just going to leave that there for now. Then I'm going to set my white points. So you just Control or Alt, I mean. So you just do Alt-click on your Mac. I think it's Control on your if you're a PC user, but I use a Mac, so Option, and then you hit the mouse button and you can change your white points. You can also see your white point up in your histogram up here. So if this is the light side, so if your highlights are blowing over, they'll hit the right side of the image. But it's easier to see if you just check this way, and you can see where they're hitting. So a few of these little reflections of the sun are overexposing a little bit. But I think generally that's about okay there. Then I set my black points. So I'll drop my blacks down quite a bit more. And I'll just kind of look at the image, see how that's affected the exposure. I do find that this image maybe is looking a little underexposed. I'm going to brighten that up there. I like to add in Vibrance. That's one of the tools that I use all the time. So I'm going to add in a good chunk of Vibrance here. Sometimes now, the other thing that I do is I have two sort of options here that I use to give the image a bit of pop, because I think you want to have, for stock, you want to have a bit of pop to this image. And right now this is looking pretty flat. So sometimes I use one or the other, or I use both depending on what the image looks like. And so you can use your tone curve down here, and you can just change your curves slightly. I add in -10 highlights, -10, or sorry, +10 on your lights, and then I'll drop the shadows a bit. And that, it's probably hard to tell on YouTube, but that just gives it a sort of a gloss over top of it, which is pretty nice. It just gives it a little tiny, a very tiny pop, and it's kind of nice. So I'll do that. And then sometimes if you do add in shadows, then you have to go back up and just make sure that you're not too much on the shadows. So sometimes you'll have to pull back your shadows up here a bit. I leave them there, or you might have to adjust your black points a little bit more, just because it's sort of affected the image, the overall image. So that's where I'm at right now. I do still find this to be a titch overexposed, although the histogram's showing that it is exposed pretty well. I think I have a lot of sky in the image, which is probably why, but I can always bring down the sky later. So we're there. And then the other thing that I like to do to give the image some pop is to use the calibration tool down here. I find that in a blue sky image like this, if you go down to your blue primary and you just add a little saturation, it really sort of gives the image a nice vibrant look to it. So that's at +14. And if I just turn it off, might be hard to see it on YouTube. It's off. That's on. It's just gives it a nice, really colorful vibrancy, and you can play with that, push it a bit, see how much you want to go. I'm going to leave that there. Now, sometimes if you feel like your sky is now a little too overexposed, I think I like the exposure right now, but you can always click on your masks, hits sky. Usually works pretty well, even for panoramas. I find that it works just like it does with single images, and so it's a pretty awesome tool that's now in Lightroom. So that looks great almost all across. There's a little bit there, but I would just ignore that in a stock photo anyway. I wouldn't bother adding that in. So I can sort of adjust the sky exposure down a little bit. That looks pretty good. So that's kind of where I'm at for this image. Now I could do some other stuff here, but the one thing that is sort of important to do before you upload and check your image for image or sensor spots. I do get dust on my sensor, so I will get spots on there. You have to remove those before uploading, or they often are rejected. Okay, so that's all done. So now I'm going to crop the image, hit the crop tool. I usually keep this unlocked when I'm doing panos, just so I can adjust the way that I want it. I'm sort of looking or thinking along the rule of third line, so I don't want to have I don't want to be off of that too much. I want as much image as I can get. I'm going to bring in the sides. Probably that looks good. So I think in Photoshop, it's going to be pretty easy to fill in these corners. I'm a little bit concerned about this. So if this doesn't work out very well for stock photography, it doesn't make much sense to spend hours trying to fix or clean up that kind of images, or that kind of like detail, or rebuilding those railings. So if it does look like it's not going to work, I'll probably pull it up and go like that and just sort of skip those railings. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I think I'm going to go with this right now, and then click done, and I'm going to edit this in Photoshop now. Okay, we have the image open in Photoshop. So I'm sure there's 100 ways to do this, and probably better ones than the way I do it. But I've been doing this forever, so I just, you can't teach an old dog too many new tricks, maybe one or two, but here's how I do it. So select the this little magic wand tool. Then I click on part of the image that's missing here, the corners. And I go to select, modify, and then I just expand it there. And I leave it at 20 pixels. And that's basically what that does, is it expands the lines out a bit, so that it sees whatever is just 20 pixels out from where you are, and that's usually good enough. So that's all around the borders of the image there, the corners. So then what I do is I go to Edit and Fill, and when you have it set at Content Aware, and then Normal and 100% opacity, and then you just hit OK, and Photoshop does its magic. And it's actually, I find that it's always surprising how well it does on filling the content in that's not there. So just a brilliant tool that Photoshop has. So yeah, the corners look good. This is a little dark. I might need to fix that up. But you can see here, this does have a lot of problems. I'll just zoom in. You can see there's it didn't do very well here. So I'd have to make a decision on how much time I want to spend fixing that up. But I typically would do that sort of using the spot healing brush there, and I could take the time and clean all that up. I'm just not sure that I want to. Sorry, I didn't have my keyboard button or my spacebar printed off. So this I am going to try to fix a bit. So what I try to do when I add in is look at it for mistakes, obviously, or things that look weird, but also repeating patterns. The eye can really sort of catch that right away. So what you want to do is just use a healing brush or some other tool just to sort of make sure that there are no repeating patterns in this stuff that's been kind of added in on the corners, or wherever it is added in. So even that right there, I haven't really done too much there, but just that alone sort of brings that line into the corner and changes the texture a bit so it doesn't look like it's repeating. And that'll make it way harder for the eye to spot those kind of problems. And the only other thing I would do is I'd make a decision on whether I'd want to do this as an editorial or royalty-free image. So I think I'm going to leave this one as editorial for now. Okay, since this is more of a tutorial on panos as opposed to using the clone stamp tool to fix problems, I'm going to just leave this alone for now and just save it back into Lightroom now that this panorama is done. So that's basically it. So once it's back saved into Lightroom, I can look at any last adjustments. I do have to sort of fix this crop, and I can either crop it up like that. Even that would probably be fine. Or I could bring it in a little and sort of leave it like that. I'm going to leave this out. I'm going to crop it in like that. So that's basically the final image.
Like it's Monday, something's going wrong with all the chemicals up in my brain. All of a sudden I don't look at anything the same way. Got a buildup of my thoughts sitting in an ashtray. I'm sorry that I'm so inconvenient, okay. Just let me be me and I'll stay out of your way. I can see the way you look at me, I'm such a disgrace. I never really asked to be brought into this place.